Whoever's ready for us can begin.
I guess that would be me.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to speak today. Just by way of a little bit of an introduction so everybody knows who I am. My name is Frank Sicoscio. I am the president of the Rhode Island Second Amendment Coalition. We are the NRA State Association of Rhode Island. I'm also an attorney licensed in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and all the federal courts. I am the city solicitor for the town of Johnston. I've been in that position since 2009. I do all the criminal prosecutions, and I am also a municipal court judge. I'm also a bail commissioner, so I wear many hats. So, excuse me a little bit. I have a bit of a cold, so that's why I have the water in front of me on this. I know we have a lot of bills in front of us here tonight, so I put some brief points on just all the bills. And I've been told by people that I talk too much, so I'm trying to limit my testimony on that, so I'll be brief. Let's talk about House Bill 7112. We are not in support of this bill, and I'll explain to you why. Last year, or a year before that, I actually did the research on a reciprocity bill, and I did the research on all the states and what they have as far as contracts and what is required for other states. We submitted a comprehensive bill. It was a couple of pages long, and it addressed all the issues that the AG has already put out here now. It had all the safeguards in it with regard to police departments being able to immediately, on a 24-hour basis, being able to check somebody if they came into the state of Rhode Island and they had a concealed carry permit. It also set requirements on there that any person coming into Rhode Island, even though he had a concealed carry permit from outside of a different state of Rhode Island, had to actually comply with Rhode Island law while they were coming in here. So yes, you could carry a firearm, but you had to comply with Rhode Island laws while you were doing it. It also had safeguards in there that said police officers from other states, if they wanted to come to Rhode Island, they could protect themselves. And that would mean they would be able to carry. Some police departments outside of the state of Rhode Island do not issue actual concealed carry permit. But the police departments would have to actually allow anyone that was stopped to be able to have the out-state agencies outside of Rhode Island check that. In addition to that, it required that an individual coming through Rhode Island had to have a picture ID in addition to their concealed carry permit on them at all times. And they were required to show it immediately. The bill we have in front of us has none of that. Now, even though we put the enabling statute language that other states used, the Attorney General's office, last time it was here, said, we don't want that. We don't want people outside of state coming into Rhode Island. Most of the states right now, they recognize other states' concealed carry permits, other than New England and other than California. If you get a Virginia or Utah permit or a Florida, you could pretty much carry anywhere across the country except for here. One of the reasons why we wanted that concealed carry permit is to protect Rhode Island residents. I myself personally have to maintain a Rhode Island permit, a Massachusetts permit, and a Connecticut permit, because the other states don't recognize my permit. So every year I have to go through the paperwork for Massachusetts to protect myself, because the Rhode Island legislature does not protect me. I have to do this as a law-abiding citizen, so in the event I take a wrong turn on the highway and I'm in Massachusetts, it's not a mandatory one-year penalty. So that's what I'm going to say briefly on that. So let me move on to the next one. House Bill 7162, this is the one where the Attorney General's office has to report to the legislature once a year to make sure that any gun bills that we're passing or any ones that they are enforcing, to make sure they're working and actually having the desired effect that they're supposed to have. One of the things that I brought up when we testified to this on the Senate side, as a prosecutor in Johnston, let me explain to you one of the things that what happened. Last year, at 3 o'clock in the morning, there was a couple of gang members from outside of the state of Rhode Island, Delaware, that went into Denny's. They were there at 3 o'clock in the morning. One of them had a 9mm handgun. Took it out, got into a fight in the middle of Denny's, was waving the firearm around. The police were called. They ended up catching the people in the parking lot. The firearm had obliterated serial numbers. The firearm was eventually found out to be stolen. The individual had no ties to Rhode Island, was a Delaware resident, had, according to his background, lots of gang affiliation, and to top it all off was a fugitive from justice. You guys wouldn't know anything about that. Want to know why? The AG took 8 months to indict him. By that time, he was gone. They set it down for a hearing The person never showed up. They issued a warrant for that person's arrest. You would never know anything about that. Why? Because if you went to gun court, there's no disposition on that case. We need to know if we're actually passing gun bills or gun legislation and the AG is actually following up on it. How can the AG come here and say, and I've been here, I've been sitting next to Jody Lindbeck, who said, we need this, we need these tools. And then in the same breath come here in front of you, look you in the face and go, but I don't want to report to you if these things are working or not. How do you have an AG that does that? That's one of my pet peeves with this. We need to know that the legislation we have is going here is working. The only way to do that is have them report once a year what they're charging and what the disposition is. If not, how else would you know who gets charged and what the disposition is? Do you think people are going to sit there all day long and just start going into the court system and typing up everybody's name through an Island Judiciary? No. We need this bill. We've had it for several years. I'm astounded that the AG doesn't want to report just once a year what they're doing with these gun bills. House Bill 7588. We oppose this because of the unintended consequences it can have. You have kids that are playing with toys, they get broken, they get worn out. What if you have somebody, a soccer mom or somebody driving down the road and gets pulled over and there happens to be a toy gun that's in the back and the tip is broken off? According to the wording of the statute, it's actually pretty loose. That person could be charged with possession of a firearm that's altered. It's no joke. How would you like those headlines? Somebody's pulled over and they have the kids' toys in the back. There has to be something more to this bill. You really need to fix this before something happens. There's a second part of this bill which we oppose. And it says, any modifications to a firearm, and they add in the phrase, any identifying marks. Let me give you the example of how this bill could be a real problem. Any one of you, if you decided you wanted to walk into a store and you wanted to buy a firearm, suppose that firearm was used. You go in there, the FFL that did this checks your background, the person that had it before, they check the serial number, they come back, the gun's perfectly legal. But the frame's been changed, or one of the other components has been changed that had a number on it. Under this bill, that possession of that firearm would now be a felony. I can tell you right now that the firearm that I carry all the time is a SIG 228. It's a 9mm, and it was built according to the casting marks in 1993. It's a pre-banned firearm. Came with a 13-round magazine. Serial numbers on the top. There's casting numbers in the front on the frame. So if the frame, which is aluminum, ever broke, I could get a replacement frame, but those numbers aren't there anymore, those marks. Am I a felon if I change that bottom piece? According to this bill, I would be, and the gun is still perfectly legal. Under the serial numbers, that gun is registered to me. I can transfer it, but the person I transfer it to, are they now in possession of a firearm that has all other marks changed? It creates a real problem when you're talking about modification, and it doesn't really address that very well. Let's talk about House Bill 7591. It's possession on school grounds. This is probably one of the most dangerous bills on this list. Every year this bill rears its ugly head, and every year we have to come in here and talk about it. This creates a gun-free zone in our schools. If you take a look at the FBI reports, 98% of all mass shootings for the last 50 years has happened in a gun-free zone. Why are we even entertaining making sure our K-12 schools are a gun-free zone? Why are we entertaining this? This is by the FBI reports. In addition to that, we're focusing on this bill narrowly focuses on a CCW holder. These are law-abiding citizens. These are people that are not the problem. This is not a loophole in the law. This is a specific exemption that was put in 1990 by our Attorney General's office because they figured at some point our schools may need private security or retired law enforcement who would be operating under a CCW, which is already in the law. That's why it's there. And I can tell you right now, I understand the police department's concern that if something happens, they don't want to have somebody on the grounds that's not a police officer with a concealed carry. Well, I can tell you, if there were children in the school and there was a choice between somebody there with a concealed carry holder and somebody there with a phone to call somebody to come down there, I'm betting on somebody with a CCW. They might take that person out. And in fact, you know what the interesting part about it is, and no one The police department did not address this. If we tragically look at what just happened in Florida, there was a sheriff on the grounds with a firearm. According to all reports, he sat there for 3 to 4 minutes listening to people getting killed and did nothing. I would have liked to have seen a CCW holder on the grounds take out that kid before he killed 17 people. We have a problem with this. We cannot allow this. We need to get real security in our school. And we've all heard about this thing in the news where we're worried about our media creating fake news. This is creating fake security in our schools. So you got fake news, this is fake security. Getting rid of a CCW holder doesn't solve any of the problems. And by the way, no one else has addressed this. In Rhode Island, there is less than 4,000 people with CCW holders. Most of them are retired police officers, people with military training. In a population of more than 1 million people, that's less than 0.4%. We're not the problem. What happens if you have a single mom who is a concealed carry holder and she has that firearm to protect herself? Are you telling me you would rather have her disarm herself to go onto the school grounds to pick up her child in case it was an emergency? You're actually creating a loophole, because now if you have a violent offender who wants to go after that person, you guarantee that that person knows when she goes into school or goes to pick up her children, she's disarmed. What are you doing to domestic violence victims at that point? You're creating victims again. This bill is absolutely horrible. We shouldn't even be entertaining it. The other bill is H7597. That is the transporting a rifle 18-year-old prohibition. What this does, and we've testified to this before, when you word the statute the way you did right now, all you do is create a defense. So you're driving down the road, you're going back and forth to the range, you have a long gun in the back. What if a police officer who's a rookie pulls you over and then arrests you? They'll say, no problem. Tell it to the judge later on that you were going to the range. You'll create a defense. So $5,000 later or $10,000 later, after you win your case and say, yeah, I was going to the range, that's great. Because this only creates a defense to somebody. It creates a real problem. And by the way, how many problems have we had in the past on this? Not a lot, huh? Again, we're doing stuff that knee-jerk reaction. By the way, everybody probably has seen the movie The Christmas Story, where Ralphie gets his BB gun. Under this type of statute, and there's several of them in here with variations on that, Ralphie's father would not only be a felon, but we'd have enhanced penalties if Ralphie went and shot somebody next door, one of his friends. Because not only do we criminalize this, we have enhanced penalties if somebody beyond the control of the individual creates that. I'm going to jump over to House Bill 7645, which is a high-capacity magazine ban. We have to stop calling it a high-capacity magazine. We have to make sure we get the terminology right. Most firearms come factory with a 10-round, 13-round, 15-round, or 30-round magazine. That's the standard capacity magazine. High-capacity magazines, usually when you go to buy them, are 30 or more. That's what they consider. Again, the firearm that I carry is a SIG 228. It's a 9mm. It's pre-banned. Factory magazines for that are 13 rounds. If this bill were to pass, the only thing it would do was I would have to get rid of my 13-round magazines and put a 10-round in there. So, of course, I'd rather 10 in the magazine, 1 in the pipe. But then, you know what it would cause? The reality would be I just carry a second magazine. Why? Because maybe 10's not enough. Maybe 13's not enough. You ask a police officer, they carry as many as they can. Because if their life is in jeopardy, they are not going to rely on, well, I got to be safe for everybody and only carry 10. They carry as many as possible. So if a police officer's life is in jeopardy, how is it any different if my life is in jeopardy if I'm facing the similar threat? I'm a good law-abiding citizen and I die because I only had 10 rounds? It doesn't work. By the way, I know one of the representatives asked, what happened in Massachusetts and Connecticut when they passed this? Well, You can take a look at some of the news articles after they passed that. Massive civil disobedience. 80 to 90% of the firearm population refused to register their firearms or turn in any high-capacity magazines. They interviewed police officers and sheriffs that said, we're not enforcing this. We're not going door to door. They got them. We're done. 80 to 90% of the law-abiding citizens said, I'm not doing it because you're putting my life in jeopardy. It's not making anybody safer. It's making me less safe. I'm not the problem. If you have a problem with people with high-capacity mags or what you want to consider high-capacity mags, why don't you enhance the penalties for a person that commits a crime with them and leave us alone? Now, the 18 to 21 bill, and there's different versions of that, we oppose them for a number of reasons. And I'm going to go back to something I mentioned before. What about a domestic violence survivor? A woman who actually has gone through the horrors of being a victim of domestic violence. And now she's on her own and she's 18 years old. Maybe she has a family. You're going to tell her that she now cannot defend herself if she wants to buy a firearm? Is that what you're doing? Because currently, right now, if somebody is emancipated and they're 18 years old, they can vote, they can enlist in the army, they can die for this country, they can do all sorts of things, but you're not going to let them protect themselves? A woman who is a victim of domestic violence, you are going to guarantee you're going to disarm her if she wanted to have a firearm in her house? There's no exemptions. There's no way to go around it, to have her qualify, to say that I'm proficient and I want to protect my family. I'm a single mom. What am I going to do? You have no exemption. All you say is, sorry, no gun for you. But what if the perpetrator is over 21? That person can have a firearm now? These bills have serious unintended consequences on this. House Bill 7762, state preemption. All I can say is, wow, when I read this one. You want to take away from the legislature the ability to have firearm control legislation and taxation. We have 39 cities and towns in Rhode Island. Do you really want that to be a variation in gun control, gun laws? Do you really want that? This was actually put in place by Representative Regenberg. Imagine how we would feel if it went the other way if this passed. What if you had a city and town that says, great, I don't have to worry about what the legislature says. And they say, we like NFA items. Do you guys know what NFA items are? They're firearms that are regulated by the federal government. So what happens is you pass this bill and say the legislature can't regulate it. What if a city and town says, we like fully automatic weapons. For a $200 tax stamp, I can apply to the government and I can get one. How about a silencer? For $200, I can buy one. So you could have a city or town that allows fully automatic weapons and silencers. And you in the legislature has zero control over that. Well, you took it away from you and gave it to the cities and towns. Be careful, it could work the other way. Let's go to House Bill 77.
Rep Knight, you want to hop in with a question?
Please. Hi, Frank.
How you doing?
Just showed up. So this...
We were almost done with Frank's short version.
The short version.
This is the condensed version, if you know me. I
just wanted to ask, because it came up in the context of something else too. The state preemption law, the proposed legislation, is just a line out of 114758, right? So it would allow, I think, cities and towns to create their own rules, and we can talk about that, right? But I think that the state law would provide a floor below which the cities and towns can't go below. Because if, for the sake of argument, let's say Barrington says, all right, we're going to have machine guns, but there's a state law against machine guns, then you wouldn't have machine guns or silencers or all the other things. At least that's how I read the law. Am I wrong?
I would disagree with you. If you're wiping out a state preemption, specifically, that means state law can't control, which means a town could say, we're allowing silencers now, and you as the state, we don't care what your gun laws say. You're getting rid of preemption, which means the state law doesn't control.
Well, or it means and we can, leave this to some court somewhere, but alternatively, it means what it normally means in preemption cases, which is, and I'll use the federal rules as an analog, in areas in which the federal law preempts state law, the state can't do a thing in that area. And, the law school example is, trucking issues, interstate trucking issues, right? But there are some areas where preemption is not present, and the established case law says the federal rules provide a floor, and below which the states cannot go. They can't legislate outside the boundaries set up by the federal law. They can legislate inside there however they want to do it. And actually, education is a good example. There's a floor in education. We can spend all the money we want. We can make schools that are absolute citadels. The federal government's never going to tell us that you can't do it, but if we try to go below in terms of what they require for protection of students, they'll say, no, you can't do that. And I think this would operate the same way.
I don't understand how you can say it's going to operate the same way if you're specifically getting rid of preemption. You're specifically saying the legislature, the state legislature, can no longer tell the cities and towns what they want to do, so they can do it. So what if a town says, we want fully automatic weapons, which under an NFA item for $200 you could get? You're specifically saying we're no longer having preemption. So you might have a town that allows it. You can't get rid of the preemption clause and say, but then the preemption clause would kick in. You're specifically getting rid of it.
That's because you know as well as I do that by getting rid of a single statute, it doesn't render all the other statutes on the books obsolete as to those cities and towns. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. All right, so we'll move on to House Bill 7766, the assault weapons ban. Okay. 1994 to 2004, we had on a federal level an assault weapons ban. Everybody knows about it. It limited ownership of a vast number of firearms. It limited magazine capacity down to 10 rounds. This was all across the country. This bill went away by its sunset clause because we had two governmental agencies that did extensive studies on this and found no reduction in crime, nothing. It was two independent agencies. All it did was infringe upon people's Second Amendment rights. It had almost no effect on crime, none. So if that didn't work on a federal level, how do you think it's going to work on a state level? Probably not going to work just the way the federal one did. And we have 10 years worth of data across the whole United States, and it didn't work. So we're trying it again. So let's get back to a question one of the representatives had. What happens when Massachusetts and Connecticut did this? Again, go back, do a little research. Massive civil disobedience. People weren't complying. People were saying, I'm not registering my firearms. I'm not getting rid of them. I'm just not doing it. It doesn't make anybody safer. Now, also, grandfathering them in. That kind of doesn't work either. You're going to grandfather in magazines. Let's start with that. Magazines aren't numbered. There's no date. You don't know when they're manufactured. How are you going to know if a magazine was purchased after this goes into effect, before this goes into effect? It's an unenforceable provision. How do you know? So you've created a problem where somebody could be arrested for something. Who bears the burden of proving when that magazine was purchased? We got a real problem with that. In addition to that, if you're going to be banning all these firearms, and of course everybody wants to talk about the AR ban, okay? I have an AR, it's considered an AR-15, but it's actually a SIG 522. It's a 22. The bullet's about that long. It is not very accurate. Past 50 to 100 yards, it's usually used for small varmint. I mean, that would be banned. But yet, I have a Remington 700 bolt action chambered in .308 that could reach out to 600 yards. That's legal, but my 22 would be illegal. Where are we going with this? It doesn't work. If you're going to go after criminals, you're going to have to go people with mental illness. Let's make sure we do it. Don't tell all the people that are out here that they can't own these firearms that they've been legally using for years and have not have a problem with. Okay? That is a real problem on that. Here's the other issue, and most people don't like to talk about this. Say the bill passes and it has a grandfather clause in it. What's stopping this bill from coming back next year saying, "No, we don't like the grandfather clause, we're taking that out"? Bills are amended all the time. So thank you for now allowing me to have it, then grandfathering me in. By the way, I have to pay $25 on each one of the firearms I have to register, and then next year when you come back and say it's now illegal, I have to turn them in, get rid of them. Really doesn't work on that, okay?
I get emails from both sides, and you're a firearms expert, and let me ask you this question, because the question has been posed to me. I know the answer, but I want to see if we think the same answer is correct.
We'll have tests, okay.
When you spoke about the weapons ban on the AR-15 and its ability to shoot, what is the difference, or is there a difference between shooting an AR-15 at close range versus a .45 automatic?
That would depend on the caliber.
Exactly. So you could put,
You're right.
you could put, in essence, depending on the ammo that you're using and so forth, could create similar results.
Correct.
Let me ask you another question. You mentioned that during the federal's weapons ban, there were studies, independent studies done about how there was no change in the mass shootings and so
Correct.
forth. But yet we hear and we see on TV and so forth that the other side of this equation say the complete opposite with other studies. So how do you compare the two?
Okay. It all depends on the studies you use. Everybody knows that you can create a poll, and basically by changing the question, you can skew the results one way or the other. When we're looking at what the actual real results are, the most reliable one is the FBI reports. And those are the ones that they use. These are the actual reported crimes by all the local police departments saying what happened where, and all the details with regard to those the shootings. If you're looking at other polls and other surveys, those numbers could be completely skewed. I would be really suspect if you have 10 years worth of data from the federal government based on the FBI reports that says one way, and then now you have some other report that says, oh, look, we have a report that says the exact opposite. Were they using the same data? Were they using the same results? What is the plus or minus on the positive, the accuracy of that? All these things have to be questioned whether you actually have an accurate study on this. I actually heard, and it was in the newspaper, that the Moms Demand Action, or the Everytown people, put out a study and said that something like 80% of Rhode Islanders is in favor of this bill. I'd like to see that survey on where that comes from, because I don't know where they're getting their data from. And then when you dig into it further, it seems as though they did a poll of, I think it was a couple of hundred students at Brown University, and they said that that was representative of all the people in the state of Rhode Island. So you can skew these results any way you want. But if you're looking at actual real numbers and two independent agencies from the government, those surveys came back and said no significant reduction in crime or violence over a 10-year period.
Now, those surveys were conducted by the government?
By the government, yes.
They oversaw the surveys?
Correct. Two independent governmental agencies checked the results using the FBI stats. And the CDC, by the way, was involved in that also. So these are actual numbers, not the latest, anti-gun professor who wants to write a dissertation on how bad guns are. These are real reports.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Representative Knight?
Thank you. Frank, just to clarify, those reports those two studies that you're mentioning, they found that their conclusions were that the ban didn't have significant effect on violent crime in America. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right. Hang on.
Sorry.
All right.
I apologize. I'm sorry about that. I thought
I
I'd turn
think-
the alarm off. Sorry.
I think it's important to note a couple things about that particular law that was put in place, and I think you agree with me. But tell me if I got something wrong. I mean, there was also a grandfather exception in there, right?
Correct.
There was a buying burst before the ban went into effect. So there was a lot of weapons on the street, and also, and probably most particularly, is that the studies were all about sort of violent crime in America, which is a huge category. Some crimes involving guns, some crimes involving guns, some crimes not involving guns. Do you happen to know if those studies ever looked specifically at the issue of mass shootings?
Your question is incredibly vague. I don't know how to answer that. You're looking at what reports?
I'm talking about the two studies that you cited, and you're saying that they had the conclusion that the ban did not have a meaningful effect on violent crime in America.
Correct.
But do you know if those studies drilled down a little bit to look in particular at the mass shooting phenomena?
No, I do not know that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. It's also interesting to note, though, with regard to that ban, if everybody is saying it would have worked, it would have done this, it would have done that, the interesting thing is after the ban in 2004 lapsed, crime didn't go up, continued to go down. So there was no spike in crime, there was no spike in violence when all of a sudden people could have these other firearms and all they could have is magazines that held more than 10 rounds. It didn't go up.
But for sure, the deadliness and frequency of mass shootings went up since 2004. I mean, we can see that.
Actually, no, the FBI reports say that it is going down, actually.
I have to
Okay.
disagree with you because I've looked at just plain lists of every mass shooting defined as a shooting where a single person or multiple people in America killed more than 4 people in a single instance with a firearm. The frequency is going up for sure. And I can, when we go offline, I can show you the data.
Okay. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned that because what report did you use? Because the FBI, I believe, categorizes a mass shooting as when 3 individuals are injured. There is a website which has categorized it as 4 individuals, and that's what they consider a mass shooting. And the actual numbers on them has been proven to be absolutely false. So I'd really like to see that because there is a website out there that is completely inaccurate and miscategorizes what they actually consider a mass shooting. So I've heard those numbers before.
Sure, we can talk after.
Okay. Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Last bill, H7854, the school resource officers. I actually had the opportunity to sit down with a couple of mayors and go over just the preliminary numbers on what this would be. So a lot of times you say, what's the cost of this going to be? And just don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's a cost-benefit analysis. It's just what they're looking at and what it would cost. Cranston has 23 schools. They did a quick evaluation, $1.7 million to put a resource officer in every school. $1.7 million. And then after the money from the state went out, that would be dumped on the cities for the taxpayer. So that would be an incredible burden that would have to be due. There has to be another way that we can get real security, real safety in our schools without a $2 million or $1 million price tag on that. There's got to be a way you can work on it. Putting these resource officers is a great idea, but the cost is astronomical. Just food for thought on that. And with that, I'm going to be quiet because I talk too much. Okay, so.
Thank you, Frank. Any questions? All right, thank you, Frank.